Brothers and sisters, my name is Chris Phillips, and I'm coming to you today with a very unique analysis of a video that you probably haven't seen and heard before. Today is September 11th, 2019, 18 years to the day, and nobody seems to want to talk about this video and what is said in this video. Why is this important? Because it's Donald Trump, the current American president, talking about 9/11 on 9/11. Roll the tape.
Donald Trump is on the line. I mean, we know him as the man behind lots of real estate in Manhattan. And of course, Donald, I understand you were actually a witness to what happened this morning.
Well, I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw this huge explosion. I was with a group of people, and I really couldn't even believe it.
Wait. Hold up. This interview has just begun, and already the narrative is developing. Take a look. Rewind the tape and watch how when he says explosion, the news plays the explosion at the exact same time. Wait a minute. Let me clip back something from this same news segment just before I started. What did he say again?
We are having some technical difficulties, which is totally understandable when you try to do ad hoc reporting and getting information to you as fast as we possibly can and making sure that it's accurate at the same time. So
Donald Trump is on.
Technical difficulties. Ad hoc reporting. Really? So you're having technical difficulties, but somehow you managed to line up the exact moment that Donald Trump called in and said explosion with a picture of the explosion? That's weird.
And even, I think, worse than that, for years I've looked right directly at the building. I'd see the Empire State Building in the foreground and the World Trade Center in the background.
Okay, so now we head into the second part of the narrative, which is that he can see the actual explosion take place. I saw an explosion from Trump Tower, he's saying. Let's take a look at that map. This is what I'm saying. You can clearly tell that Trump Tower is way uptown and World Trade Center is way downtown Manhattan. So there is a lot of distance. So what I did was I went on Google Maps and there's a cool little feature called Measure Distance. So what I did was I was like, how far is it from World Trade to Trump Tower as the crow flies? And the answer is 3.99 miles, 4 miles. Can you see 4 miles without binoculars? Okay, so let me just add the fact that the attacks happened early in the morning, which means that all the business that takes place early in the morning, him and the people he's meeting with, they're just staring at the New York landscape at the right moment without binoculars. Instead of doing business, instead of looking at each other doing something in the office, they're all looking at World Trade Center? I don't think so. He even said he saw people falling out of the building. Here he is.
I have a window in my apartment that specifically was aimed at the World Trade Center because of the beauty of the whole downtown Manhattan. And I watched as people jumped, and I watched the second plane come in.
Bullshit. Lies. All lies. There's no way from 4 miles away that he's able to see bodies falling out of the building. Lies. Let's continue.
And now I'm looking at absolutely nothing. It's just gone. And it's just hard to believe.
Donald, Alan Marcus here. Your building is, the Trump Tower, is one of the great tourist attractions in the world. It's well known universally. Are you taking any precautions there in light of what happened at the World Trade Center?
Well, Alan, we've always had, as you know, very, very strong security, but there's very little you can do about planes crashing into a building. I mean, you look at Larry Silverstein, who's a terrific owner in New York and a very good friend of mine who I just called. I was very worried about him because I assumed maybe he was in the building. He took possession of the building 1 week ago. As you know, he just bought the World Trade Center.
Right.
Hold up. Larry Silverstein bought the towers a week before the attacks. Let's hear from him.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
I'm not even going to go into how fucked up and obvious it is that that is a controlled demolition. Even the phrase pull it is a controlled demolition phrase. So that means premeditated explosives. You can't just pull a building, can you? No, you have to plant a series of explosives in order to bring it down floor by floor, exactly how Building 7 came down. I am not going to talk about Building 7 anymore. You can look it up yourself. Let's get back to that interview.
Right.
And he was in his office, and he was getting ready to move into the World Trade Center over the next 2 weeks. So when I just spoke to him, there's nothing you can do when people are going to be bombing planes at your building. Now,
Donald,
I guess maybe the world is going to be changing, and maybe you're going to have F-16s flying all over the city, etc. But it's a pretty tough situation.
Donald, you have one of the landmark buildings down in the financial district, 40 Wall Street. Did you have any damage, or did you know what's happened down there?
Well, it was an amazing phone call I made. 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan, and it was actually, before the World Trade Center, was the tallest. And then when they built the World Trade Center, it became known as the second tallest, and now it's the tallest. And I just spoke to my people, and they said it's the most unbelievable sight. It's probably 7 or 8 blocks away from the World Trade Center, and yet Wall Street is littered with 2 feet of stone and brick and mortar and steel, and there are thousands of people walking over the debris over the Brooklyn Bridge, where they're sending them out over the Brooklyn Bridge to Brooklyn, and then I guess they're going to have to figure out how to get home from there. But they have between 1 foot and 2 feet of debris right in front of a building that's probably, you would say, Alan, 6 or 7 blocks away.
Wow. Hold up. There are so many details in what he just said that can reveal so much. He's saying that his own building, 7 blocks away from the World Trade Center, had 2 feet of debris in front of it. 7 blocks. Explosions. Explosions send debris 7 blocks. Not jet fuel.
Donald, this is Roland Smith.
Hi, Roland.
You know, how you doing on this kind of day? You know, at some point we're going to put all this behind us, and you, as a visionary, particularly in New York real estate, what do you think that we ought to do as a city, as a people, when all of this when the mourning stops, when the dead are honored, and we've found out what caused it and maybe corrected it? What does the city need to do?
Well, I guess the big thing that you really will have to do is never forget. You just can't forget that something like this happened.
What? Never forget. He's already established the preeminent branding behind the day. The day of. Never forget. Thanks, Donald.
I was so disappointed when they closed the stock exchange, but of course, at some point, you had no choice, you know, when they initially announced it was closing, because you want to just say, the hell with it, you're going forward, nothing's going to change. But the fact is, something has changed very dramatically. And I think one of the very sad things is going to be when you look at the skyline of New York, which has become so emblazoned in your own memory, and you look at the skyline of New York and you see these buildings, these 2 buildings, whether you love them or don't love them, they were a great part of the skyline. And then when you look at the skyline after 2001, and you're going to see a skyline without these 2 buildings, you're going to say, what happened? People won't believe it. You know, when you show your children or your grandchildren in years to come what New York looked like in the year 2000, and then what New York looked like just a year later, they're going to say, what happened?
Hey, Donald,
it's hard to believe.
in the year 2000, Donald, you considered running for president. If you had done that and if you had been successful, what do you think you'd be doing right now?
Well, I'd be taking a very, very tough line, Alan. I mean, you know, most people feel they know at least approximately the group of people that did this and where they are. But, boy, would you have to take a hard line on this. This just can't be tolerated, and it's got to be very, very stern. This is, as you and I were discussing before, Alan, this was probably worse than Pearl.
Wow. The day of 9/11, Donald Trump, future president of the United States, is already trumping war. Very hard line. Got to be very stern. We kind of know who they are and where they are. Really? The day of? You already know where they are and who they are? How? He even goes so far as to bring up Pearl Harbor, which has a really wild bit of relevance because there is a group called the Project for a New American Century that has George Bush, Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and a whole bunch of neoconservatives involved in it that said what America would need is a new Pearl Harbor. Look it up. I'm not even going to tell you anymore. Let's keep going.
Many more people are dead, and you know, they don't know, they have no idea, but I have somebody that was down there who witnessed at least 10 people jumping out of the building from 70 and 80 stories up in the air.
Gotcha! I've already shown you the video where he said he saw bodies falling. Now it's he has people seeing bodies falling. Gotcha. Lies.
I mean, you probably have 25 or 30,000 is the number I've heard, but I would think would be much more than that. I think the most of the damage will be caused not by even in the building in terms of the people dead, but by the people on the streets from falling debris.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation, and it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid, and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows, you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have.
The United States President himself saying that he thinks on 9/11 there are bombs in the buildings. Why isn't anybody talking about this video? Why? This is very important. Clearly very important. The strongest structure you can have. We have to listen close. These words are not to be easily dismissed. Why isn't he saying these things now? So, in conclusion, brothers and sisters, ask more questions, look back, compare and analyze data, because nothing is what it seems. This world we are in is not what it seems. 9/11 was the beginning of the Third World War, and we are in the middle of not just the Third World War now, but also the Second Civil War, and we have got to be real about what has happened and the impact that it's having on all of us. So I offer up this video as an analysis of something that is a very important public record and needs to be discussed much, much deeper. Everybody, peace, love, and zero chicken grease. Save the world.